Hello everybody, it's Foxy speaking, and welcome to another episode of Foxy's Fun Inspirational Chats. And today I will be your host. And in this episode, it's been a long time since I've done an episode like this, but this is an episode of Story Time with Foxy. I think last time I did about part 10, and something like that. I think this would be about part 11 now. But this I'm going to be reading an old childhood storybook which my grandparents got. Originally, this was a book for my brother and I. This book here is called Orlando the Marmalade Cat, His Silver Wedding by Kathleen Hale. This is the storybook. Quite an amusing look on the back cover. You know, my grandparents, I remember the very time when my grandparents newly got it. I can remember the very time they newly got it and read it to my brother and I. You know, and we've kept the book ever since. When does this... we must have been about 9... I was about 9 or 10 when my grandparents got this book. So I've had it for about nearly a good part of 15 years, this story book, taking into account my nearly 24-year age. But this episode, I know it's going to take a particularly appealing interest to one particular friend of mine, a newfound friend who I may have mentioned before, and to share an example about her is once you get to know her, you just cannot help but learn to love this wonderful lady. She had 2 new grandchildren. She had the excitement, well, she dealt with the excitement of 2 new births of 2 new grandchildren. And in the latterly part of 2024, she was asking me quite curiously some questions about what books did I like to read as a little boy, so that to give some ideas, to get a similar sort of storybook for her grandchildren, you know. So she was taking a very loving interest in me, this lovely lady, and then I recommended that the book Cat and Canary to her. And if I may so share, Pamela, if you're watching, if you and your husband are watching, I'd recommend this very book too. Need to read a title. I would certainly recommend this very book, Orlando the Marmalade Cat, His Silver Wedding. I would certainly recommend this storybook to your grandchildren, because I think they'd very much like this storybook too. My brother and I, we enjoyed our grandparents reading it to us, or anybody reading it to us. So yes. And let's give it a good read now, shall we? Orlando the Marmalade Cat, His Silver Wedding. Orlando the Marmalade Cat, His Silver Wedding by Kathleen Hale. Orlando and his dear wife Grace were sitting by the fire one evening and talking over old times. "Do you remember when we first met?" Orlando asked her. "It will soon be 2 years ago." "Oh, I remember everything that has ever happened to us, and every word you have ever said to me," Grace replied, and she carefully washed her beloved husband's face, leaving no whisker unturned in her wish to prove her devotion. Orlando continued. "When people have been happily married for 25 years, they give a party, which they call their silver wedding. After 50 years have passed, they give a golden wedding party, and a diamond wedding one after 60 years. But cats begin sooner." for they have 9 lives and celebrate each wedding 9 times over. It is high time we gave our first silver wedding party. Grace adored fun and gaiety. Her beautiful eyes gleamed happily, and her claws crept in and out as she counted the guests they would invite. Orlando wrote the invitation cards. Pansy, the tortoiseshell kitten, blotted the wet ink. Blanche, the white one, put the cards in the envelope, and then Tinkle licked the stamps and thumped on them. For her little daughters, Grace made party frocks with catkin frills and pussy willow trimmings. All thrills and fur pillows, as Tinkle rather scornfully described them. He himself refused to dress up for the occasion, for he thought it wasn't manly. But he did promise faithfully to wash behind his ears. While Grace was busy, Tinkle had his sisters discussed in secret what silver wedding presents they should give their parents. They decided that Blanche and Pansy should go to the cat shop and buy some pretty mouse skins to make into a fur rug. Tinkle was to write a poem. Grace wanted to wear her wedding dress at the party, but when she'd opened the trunk in which it had been put away, nothing of it was left but a little heap of dust. Poor Grace burst into tears. Sadly, she thought of her lovely fishskin train, the shrimp trimmings, her butter muslin veil, and the priceless trout skeleton tiara, all gone. Orlando comforted her. "My dear," he said, "a dress like that was bound to wither away. I will buy you a new one just as gorgeous." So Grace dried her eyes and cheerfully began to cook for the party. Orlando went out to post the invitations and buy the new frock. As he pushed the last envelope into the letterbox, a delicious scent floated past his nose. "I smell a wedding dress," whispered Orlando, and he followed it round to the corner. He came upon a man carrying a fine big fish with a pretty spotted skin and frilly red fins. "Just the thing for Grace's train, and much grander than her old one," thought Orlando. The man's pockets were full of shrimps and trout, and he had a roll of butter muslin under one arm. He indeed was everything necessary for a perfect wedding dress. Orlando sniffed at the man's ankles to find out if his top half was friendly. "You must keep away from me," said the man. "I am called the catnapper. Some folk nap kids and are called kidnappers, but they say I nip cats." But Orlando knew by the catnapper's ankles that he had a kind heart, and was sure that he would give him what he wanted for the dress. "Don't say I haven't warned you," said the catnapper as Orlando persisted in following him. Faster and faster went the catnapper on his long legs, but Orlando still kept up with him. "Well," said the catnapper at last, "if you insist on coming with me, I had better give you a memory quencher. Otherwise you'll remember your home when you have come too far to find your way back." He handed a pill to Orlando, who swallowed it obediently. "That'll make you feel a bit sleepy," the catnapper explained. "When you begin to trip over your whiskers, I'll give you a lift." Very soon Orlando began to long for a satin sofa to sleep upon, or a bed of hyacinths, a bower of ferns, the airing cupboard, a pile of clean linen, or even the hard pavement beneath him. He yawned, tripped over his whiskers, and lay down fast asleep. The catnapper lifted him up gently and carried him. Orlando began sleeping soundly until they reached the catnapper's home, where a screeching and meowling and mewing and yowling awakened him. He opened one sleepy eye and looked down upon a whirlpool of cats. They were all of sizes, colours and shapes. They twisted and turned on their hind legs, heaving up and down like little weaves crested with white paws and faces. Their eyes resembled green and yellow bubbles, and their open mouths were curly and pink as tiny shells. How they loved the catnapper! He filled their plates and dishes, which littered the floor, with the shrimps and fish from his pockets. Orlando stayed awake just long enough to eat half a shrimp and fell asleep with the whiskers sticking out of his mouth. "Uncle Truffle," said the catnapper to a huge black cat, help me put our new guest to bed. He's dog-tired." Uncle Truffle first stretched and tested his legs in turn, to make sure he could trust them, and then sauntered over to the cupboard. He scratched the door open. There were several beds inside, but they were full of kittens. "We'll put him in the cot then," said the catnapper. "I was going to drape it with butter muslin to make it look pretty, but I'll do that without waking him." When the cats had eaten all the fish, the soft noise of their washing and purring sounded like the lapping and murmuring of a far distant sea. The catnapper took needle and thread to sew flounces. And curtains onto the cot. Uncle Truffle mounted guard over the sleeping Orlando and gazed at him with unblinking devotion. "I recognize you," he whispered to himself. "Orlando, my dear brother-in-law, who once helped me when all the world was against me." Uncle Truffle guessed that his sister Grace would be wondering anxiously where her husband was, and he was determined to restore them to each other. All the cats slept except Uncle Truffle, who carefully thought out a plan. Orlando had been away a long time, and Grace began to worry. She listened for the soft velvet tread of his paws and the half-purr, half-mew with which he always greeted her, but it was so silent you could have heard a whisker drop. The kittens joined her as she paced anxiously up and down the room. "This is terrible," gasped Grace in despair. "I shall ring up the police." "Orlando, the Marmalade Cat is lost," she told the chief inspector. She told the chief detective on the telephone. "Don't worry, Mom," he said kindly. "Nobody will hurt him. We'll find him for you." "Oh, I do hope so," she cried, and sank down onto the sofa, holding the kittens tightly to her for comfort. Tinkle had an idea. He slipped out of his mother's arms and ran into the cat shop. "Our father has disappeared," he told Mr. Catamole, the shopkeeper. "We kittens are going to look for him, and we want to be disguised in case an enemy has got him." Mr. Catamole pushed a box across the counter labelled "Disguises for Detectives." "Father will pay," said Tinkle, and raced home with it. Grace was writing an advertisement to be printed in the Daily News, offering a reward for the safe return of her husband without being seen by her. The kittens quickly dressed themselves in the disguises. Tinkle wore a false nose and a moustache on his tail, as the nose left no room for it on his face. Pansy fitted herself into a specially made teapot with windows. Blanche pulled a sheet over her head with a ghost's skull painted on it. Night fell, and all was ready. The search party set out, up the streets and down the alleys, in the parks and through the gardens. The kittens left no dustbin unsniffed, no gutter unexplored, neither in the trees nor in the ground. Had Orlando left a clue. At first the kittens enjoyed themselves, but after a while they grew tired and disappointed. The world was larger than they had thought, and their disguises hindered rather than helped. Suddenly, a huge black tomcat stood in their path. "I'm your wicked Uncle Truffle," he cried. "Maybe your parents have mentioned my name." "We've heard of our Uncle Truffle," replied Tinkle, trying to hide behind his false nose. "But not that he was wicked. How do you do?" "Very well, thank you," said Uncle Truffle. "I'm not all that wicked, really, but people said I was. Your dear parents would never believe the bad stories they had heard about me, and I have always wanted to show my gratitude. Now my opportunity has come. I can tell you where your father is." And he gave Tinkle a note containing instructions for the rescue of Orlando. "Give that to your mother," he said, and watched the kittens scuttle home as fast as they could. "I would do anything for Grace's kids," he thought lovingly. Meanwhile, the news of Orlando's disappearance had spread through the town. Good cats were distressed. They searched for him day and night on the rooftops, and scanned the streets below for his beloved figure. Bad cats, however, were delighted. They had always envied Orlando for his happy home and for the love and friendship the world laid at his feet. The wicked throng collected on Grace's doorstep and pushed their way into her drawing room, each one determined to live there instead of Orlando. "Fetch me my slippers," hissed one ruffian in Grace's ear. "Cook my dinner," growled another. Mercifully, the kittens dashed into the drawing room, just in time to save poor Grace. Tinkle's false nose had slipped out of place. Pansy's breath came through her teapot spout in steamy little puffs, and Blanche's shroud was upside down. Their strange appearance frightened the cats right away. They fled screeching up the chimney and out through the window. "Oh, what would I have done without you, my darlings?" gasped Grace. "Pooh, that's Muffin," replied Tinkle grandly, and had her Uncle Truffle's note. She opened it eagerly and read, "When the moon rises, ride bicycle made for two straight on till you reach blue gates leading to Pink House. Hide till Orlando appears. Take him home on your bike. Your loving brother T." Grace ran to Mr. Catramel's shop to get the bike made for two. "Trade's good," he said as he wheeled it into the street for her. The chief detective from the police station had just bought a balloon and telescope. "The police cat has gone up into it to look for your husband." Grace smiled mysteriously and mounted the bike, for the moon was rising. She tinkled the bell merrily and pedalled skillfully through the traffic. Her eyes shone like lamps, so she needed no other light. Out into the country she sped, turning neither to left nor right. This was easy because she had never been quite sure which was which. At last, Grace came to the large blue gate which, though she did not know it, led to the catnapper's home. She coasted down a dark avenue of overhanging trees and found the pink house at the bottom. Everything seemed to have been made for the comfort of cats. The garden was half wild and rustling with mice. It was divided into smaller ones by old brick walls. The wall tops made a network of paths such as cats love. The house was painted a beautiful salmon pink. Strange, eerie cat faces modelled in. Plaster appeared round corners and under the eaves, placed there, no doubt, to frighten dogs away. Grace waited behind a statue near the front door. After a long time had passed, the door slowly opened and a white cot on wheels was pushed out into the moonlit garden by a nurse. This was not at all what Grace expected, and she was suddenly afraid that Uncle Truffle's plan had gone wrong. Then she recognized Uncle Truffle himself in the nurse's uniform. "What is he playing at?" she wondered anxiously. "This is no time to joke." She remembered that he was supposed to be wicked, and for a moment she mistrusted him. "I do believe you catnapped Orlando, and now wants to steal me as well." She was about to remount the bicycle and ride away, blinded with tears of disappointment, when the cot came alongside, and in it what looked like a large marmalade kitten, clasping a kitten's doll. A baby bonnet framed the marmalade's face, and a dummy was stuck in the marmalade mouth. It was Orlando in disguise. Quick! Hissed Uncle Truffle. There's the catnapper. He's looking through the window. He mustn't see us taking Orlando away, for he can't bear to part with any of his cats. Orlando was only half awake, but they hoisted him onto the back saddle of the bicycle and pushed it up the avenue to the main road. Uncle Truffle helped Grace to mount and whispered, "The moon rides high. In a stormy sky, off you must go, like arrow from bow," and he gave the bicycle a shove. Grace pedalled swiftly for home and safety. It wasn't so easy, for Orlando was too sleepy to do his share. Orlando was awake by the time they reached home. He threw off his disguise, gave the doll to Grace and told her to undress it. "This is the wedding dress I promised you," he said proudly. Grace was too happy to speak as she unwrapped the doll. There lay the lovely spotted skin, shrimp husks, trout skeleton, and a length of butter muslin. "I awoke in the night," Orlando explained, "and while the catnapper purred in his sleep, I wrapped these up in a shawl. I found the doll's bonnet in my cot." Grace put on the dress and tied it with dainty shrimp whisker bows. Orlando washed himself very thoroughly all over. There was not a moment to lose, for in half an hour the party would begin. Grace hastily dressed the kittens. The footlights of a toy theatre that Mr. Catamole had provided lit up enchanting scenery. Orlando and Grace mounted the stage and were ready to receive their guests. An orchestra of musical policemen led by the chief detective played soft music. The guests began to arrive, and each one laid a handsome present on the table placed there for the purpose. All the intentions had been accepted, and Kathleen Hale is just coming through the door wearing her best dress. As the orchestra played the opening bars of a tango, in walked Uncle Truffle, followed by the catnapper and all his cats. He went straight up to Grace and asked her to dance with him. Grace went as white as her wedding veil, but summoning all her courage, she commanded him in a firm voice to go. To her great surprise, the catnapper turned sadly and left the room at once. He looked so unhappy that Grace felt sorry for him, and as soon as her duties as hostess allowed her, she went in search for him. She found him in the kitchen. He had taken off his overcoat and darned a hole in it with white wool. He was now painting the darn with Tinkle's white colours to match the rest with the coat. Grace's heart was touched. "He's just a great big kitten," she said to herself. "That's all he is. Now, tell me," Grace asked the catnapper gently, "why do you steal cats? Think of their unhappy owners, their heartbroken husbands and wives, their orphaned children and bereaved parents. The catnapper's eyes filled with tears. I don't steal them. They'll steal me. They steal me, he sobbed. I just can't keep cats away from me. They follow me and won't go, and I have to make them comfortable. What else can a man do? Oh, I see, said Grace. She was now convinced of the catnapper's innocence. I fancy I must be rather a fascinating kind of fella, he added, a trifle conceitedly. Well, you must try not to be too fascinating, Grace replied severely, and he humbly promised to try. Grace pinned a nosegay on his buttonhole and said, Come back to the party and see if you can be happy without calling too much attention to yourself. Orlando led Grace to the centre of the floor, and they danced so beautifully together that all the guests stood spellbound. Grace twirled and whirled while Orlando stamped and leapt until they felt exhausted on the sofa. The guests carried on the dance until they grew footsore, and the orchestra begged for a rest. There was an interval for refreshments. While the ices and cool drinks were handed round, the catnappers' cats entertained the party. They did clever impersonations, and the kittens joined in. Tinkle pretended to be a black whiting, and Pansy and Blanche acted their famous elastic kitten. It was great fun, and thunderous applause shook the ballroom. Orlando went to the window for a breath of fresh air, and at that moment the police cat up in his balloon spied him through a telescope. He came down at once and floated right down to the window. There was a sharp tussle when he tried to rescue Orlando, but Grace explained everything to the police cat and invited him to the party. All good things have to end some time, if only to give way to something better. The silver wedding party was no exception to the rule, and after thanking their host and hostess for having them, the guests said goodbye. Orlando and Grace waved farewell from the balcony. Though the catnapper and his cats had to return to their kittens, Uncle Truffle stayed on till the following day. Gather me round, he said to the kittens. I will tell you my adventures. With dreamy eyes he told them of his life with the pirates in the South Seas, the cowboys in the Wild West, the brave soldiers in the Forest Legion, and the smugglers selling whiskey when they weren't supposed to. But when he said he had been eaten by cannibals, the kittens began to wonder if their uncle was telling the truth. Did these things really happen to you? Tinkle asked. Uncle Truffle loftily replied, Well, they usually might have, you know. They were very good stories, however, and the kittens were sad when their uncle went home, but he promised to come back quite often and tell them more. Grace folded up her wedding dress and said sadly to Orlando, It is so beautiful. It seems a shame to throw it away, yet it won't keep, will it? It would make a delicious soup, he suggested. What a good idea, said Grace, and popped it into a saucepan. The kittens had forgotten, in the excitement of Orlando's disappearance and rescue to give their parents the presents they had made for them. Pansy and Blanche fetched the lovely fur rug and spread it on the floor. The family sat cosily upon it and drank each other's health in the soup. Tinkle bought his poem and read it aloud. The end. Orlando the Marmalade Cat, His Silver Wedding. This is certainly a fantastic story. Certainly a fantastic story from my childhood, or when it was read to me during my childhood, many years ago now. And it's certainly a storybook I would recommend for my wonderful friend Pamela's grandchildren. I would certainly recommend it for her grandchildren to read big time, for sure. But may I take the time of thanking you most very greatly sincerely for watching this very recent episode of the Foxy's Fun Inspirational Chat series. Please let me know what your thoughts are on this in the comments down below. Thanks all very greatly sincerely indeed for watching, and I shall certainly see you in the very next episode. Ta-ta for now, another time, goodbye, and may happiness be knocking kindly on your doorstep.